All right, so ready to dive back into that class from January 27th and 25th.
Oh, absolutely. It's always fun to revisit these big ideas, especially from a period like the Enlightenment. A time when people were really pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable to even think about.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when it came to like religion and the role of government,
Oh,
right?
totally. And one of the most radical shifts?
Mm.
The rise of deism.
Oh yeah, deism. It wasn't quite atheism, but it was definitely a big departure from traditional beliefs.
For sure. Instead of a god who was constantly intervening in human affairs, deists believed in a more hands-off creator.
Yeah, like a cosmic clockmaker, right?
Yeah.
They believed God created this incredible universe, set it in motion, and then just kind of stepped back to watch it all unfold.
Exactly. No miracles, no direct intervention, just the beauty of a perfectly designed system running its course.
So basically, here's the universe. Good luck figuring it out yourselves.
Pretty much. But that raises a really interesting question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, if God isn't handing down commandments or, promising eternal rewards and punishments, where does morality even come from?
Hmm, that's a good point.
Hmm.
Like, what motivates people to be good if there's no divine judge watching over them?
Right. It's a question that deists really wrestled with. It forced them to think deeply about the source of their own ethics and values, apart from religious doctrine.
Yeah, that must have been a pretty radical shift in thinking for the time.
Definitely. Even figures like Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, was grappling with these ideas. He actually edited his own version of the Bible.
A deist Bible? What, like, did he just cut out all the miracles and stuff?
Pretty much. He removed anything that smacked of the supernatural, anything that couldn't be explained through reason and logic. It was a fascinating attempt to reinterpret scripture through a purely rational lens.
Wow, I'd love to get my hands on a copy of that deist Bible. Talk about a different perspective.
Uh-huh, right. But speaking of influential figures, we can't forget about John Locke. His ideas about natural rights were absolutely foundational for modern democracy.
Oh yeah, Locke. He was basically saying that humans are born with certain inherent rights, like the right to life, liberty, and property.
Exactly. And these rights aren't granted by any king or government. They exist simply because we're human.
So it's not like the king is graciously bestowing these rights upon us. They're ours by nature.
Precisely. And this idea had a huge impact. Like, think about the American Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's directly influenced by Locke's thinking.
Wow, so we're seeing how these Enlightenment ideas actually shaped the very foundations of nations. It's not just abstract philosophy, it's actually having real-world consequences.
Absolutely. And Locke didn't stop at natural rights. He also had some pretty revolutionary thoughts about the nature of government itself.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, he believed in this concept of a social contract between the governed and the government.
A social contract, what does that mean?
Basically, the people agree to be ruled in exchange for the protection of their rights. But here's the catch.
Uh-oh.
If the government fails to uphold its end of the bargain, if it infringes on those natural rights, the people have the right to change it or even abolish it altogether.
Whoa. That's a pretty bold statement for the time, basically saying that ultimate power rests with the people, not with some king or emperor.
Exactly. And it's not just some theoretical idea for Locke. He witnessed the Glorious Revolution in England firsthand. Parliament basically fired the king.
Oh, wow, that's right. So he actually saw this social contract theory playing out in real life.
Right. It solidified his belief that the people have the inherent right to hold their government accountable.
And that idea had a huge impact on the American colonists too, right? It helped inspire them to declare independence from British rule.
For sure, the Enlightenment was spreading across the Atlantic.
Okay, so we're seeing how these Enlightenment thinkers weren't just coming up with abstract theories, they were directly influencing some of the biggest political upheavals of their time.
Yeah. But then things get a little more pessimistic with another key figure, Montesquieu.
Montesquieu. Oh yeah, he had a different take on human nature, didn't he? Wasn't he a bit more cynical than Locke?
Yeah, you could say that. While Locke focused on the inherent goodness of humanity, Montesquieu was a little more cautious.
Like he didn't quite buy into the whole noble savage idea.
Not exactly. He believed that all humans, even the most well-intentioned ones, crave power and are prone to abusing it if given the chance.
So even the nicest person in the world, if you give them enough power, they could become a tyrant.
That was his thinking. It wasn't really about individual virtue for Montesquieu. It was about creating systems that would prevent power from becoming too concentrated in the hands of anyone.
Okay, I see where he's coming from. It's like the old saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly. And Montesquieu's solution to this problem of power was to create a system of checks and balances.
Checks and balances, like what we have in the U.S. government, with the different branches of government keeping each other in check.
That's it. He believed in dividing power among different branches with separate responsibilities, each capable of limiting the power of the others.
So no one person or group could become too powerful. Smart.
Right. And his ideas had a massive influence on the way governments were structured all around the world, not just in America. But, Montesquieu didn't just focus on the structure of government. He also had some interesting ideas about how the size and complexity of a society should actually influence the type of government it had.
What do you mean, like different sizes for different societies?
Yeah. He argued that in large, complex societies, a single strong ruler might be necessary to maintain order.
Interesting. So it's like the bigger the ship, the more experienced the captain needs to be.
Kind of. He believed smaller societies, like ancient Athens, for example, were better suited for a more direct form of democracy.
Oh, I see. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to government, according to Montesquieu.
Not at all. The ideal form of government depends on the specific needs and circumstances of the society it's governing. And even though some of his ideas about strong rulers might sound kind of strange to us now,
A little bit, yeah.
it's important to remember the historical context he was writing in. Plus, it's pretty remarkable that he was making these connections between the size of a society and the most effective form of government, It's an insight that people still debate today.
That's a good point. So we've got these three big thinkers, Locke, Montesquieu, and what was the first one again? The deist one.
Thomas Jefferson. Well, he wasn't strictly a deist philosopher like the others, but he definitely embraced some of those deist ideas.
Right, Jefferson. So we've got these three guys all coming from slightly different angles, but they all share this commitment to using reason and critical thinking to make society better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They believed in questioning tradition, challenging authority, and using evidence and logic to figure out how things work and how they could be improved.
Yeah, it's like they were saying, don't just accept things blindly. Think for yourselves. Figure out what makes sense.
Absolutely. That's the essence of the Enlightenment.
And that's a pretty powerful legacy, wouldn't you say? I mean, that spirit of inquiry and critical thinking is still so important today, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
The Enlightenment challenged people to think differently about, well, everything. About religion, about government, about the natural world. And that's a legacy that continues to shape our world even today.
It makes you wonder, though, if they were willing to question such fundamental things back then, what other areas of life might we need to re-examine today? What sacred cows might we be taking for granted that deserve a closer look?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I think it's one that each of us needs to answer for ourselves. What areas of your life, your beliefs, your values feel untouchable? Are there any assumptions you've inherited that might benefit from a fresh perspective?
Ooh, okay. So it's not just about learning about history, it's about applying those Enlightenment principles to our own lives, our own way of seeing the world.
Exactly. It's about embracing that spirit of curiosity, that willingness to question, and that commitment to using reason and evidence to guide our thinking. It's almost like they handed us a toolbox full of these critical thinking skills and said, go explore, question everything, see what you discover.
And who knows? Maybe we'll even make some groundbreaking discoveries of our own along the way.
Exactly. You never know what you might find when you start asking the right questions. It's funny, we were talking about questioning things because the Enlightenment wasn't just about overthrowing kings or rewriting the Bible. It also had a huge impact on the way people saw the world around them, on the whole process of discovery and understanding.
So it's like going beyond the political and religious upheavals.
Yeah, think about it. Before the Enlightenment, most of what people knew just came from tradition,
Really?
From religious authority or ancient texts. They didn't really question it.
Right. So what changed?
Well, Enlightenment thinkers started championing a whole new way of knowing, a way based on observation and experimentation and reason.
So instead of just accepting things as they were, they started asking why, and then actually trying to find evidence to back up their answers.
Exactly. They were pioneers in what we now call the scientific method. And this new way of thinking had a huge impact on fields like astronomy, physics, medicine. Suddenly, the universe wasn't just this mysterious realm controlled by the whims of gods and spirits anymore.
It was something that could be studied and understood through careful observation and analysis.
Exactly. It was like the universe became this giant clockwork mechanism that people could take apart and figure out how it worked.
I can see how this emphasis on reason and observation really kind of permeated every aspect of Enlightenment thought. It wasn't just about abstract ideas anymore. It was about changing the way people approach the world.
Right. It was about empowering them to seek knowledge for themselves, not just relying on what they were told.
Yeah, that makes sense. And didn't they have those salons back then, those gatherings where intellectuals would get together to discuss these new ideas?
Oh yeah, the salons. Those were like the social media of the Enlightenment. It was an incredible time.
I bet. So tell me, what were these salons like?
They were these informal gatherings where intellectuals, artists, writers could all just come together to debate, share ideas, challenge each other's assumptions.
So like a giant brainstorming session for the most curious minds of the era. I can only imagine the conversations they must have had.
Oh, they were amazing. They would talk about everything: politics, religion, science, philosophy.
Fueled by a shared passion for knowledge and that belief in the power of reason. That's so cool.
Right. And this whole spirit of open inquiry and debate, it was crucial for spreading Enlightenment ideals beyond just the universities and the royal courts, It helped make these ideas accessible to a wider audience, sort of democratizing knowledge in a way.
It's like the Enlightenment went viral. But instead of memes, they were spreading revolutionary ideas about reason and individual liberty.
I like that. The Enlightenment going viral. But, it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
What do you mean?
Well, for all the positive changes that the Enlightenment brought about, it wasn't perfect. It still had its flaws and blind spots.
Okay, that's fair. No historical period is perfect, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
But what kind of blind spots are we talking about here?
Well, for one thing, a lot of Enlightenment thinkers, even though they were talking about individual liberty and equality, they still held some pretty discriminatory views.
Oh.
Yeah, like their ideas about natural rights often didn't apply to women or people of color or people from lower social classes.
So even though they were challenging centuries of tradition, they were still kind of limited by the prejudices of their own time.
Sadly, yeah. It's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear,
That's a good point.
And it's something we should always keep in mind. We need to be critical of our own assumptions and biases, even when we think we're on the right side of history.
So even though the Enlightenment wasn't perfect, it gave us the tools to recognize those imperfections and hopefully work towards a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. The Enlightenment wasn't a destination, it was a journey.
A journey towards a better future.
Exactly. And that journey's still going on today. It's up to all of us to continue that work, to keep pushing for progress and fighting for equality.
Okay, so we've explored the intellectual side of the Enlightenment, its impact on politics and science, and we've acknowledged some of its shortcomings. But why should we even care about this today?
That's the big question, isn't it? Why does any of this matter centuries later? Well, I think the answer lies in the fact that we're still living in the shadow of the Enlightenment.
You mean its ideas still influence us today?
Absolutely. From the way our governments are structured to the way we approach scientific discovery to the very values we hold dear, you can see the fingerprints of Enlightenment thinking everywhere.
So even if we don't realize it, we're still reaping the benefits of what those thinkers started centuries ago.
For sure. And beyond that, I think there's something really inspiring about the Enlightenment. This idea that ordinary people can use their minds to question the status quo and create a better world. It shows that we all have the power to make a difference.
So it's not just about dusty old books and powdered wigs, it's about a way of thinking, a way of being in the world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive passengers on this ride called life. We have the power to steer the ship, to shape our own destinies and the future of our society.
And that's a pretty powerful message, wouldn't you say?
It is, and it's one that's just as relevant today as it was back then, maybe even more so. We're facing some pretty big challenges in the world today, and we need that same spirit of inquiry, that same commitment to reason and progress to help us find solutions.
So we've talked about these big Enlightenment thinkers, but what would you say is the most important thing that came out of the whole Enlightenment?
That's a tough one, but I think maybe the biggest shift was in how people view knowledge and authority, Before the Enlightenment, truth was often just dictated by tradition or religious dogma.
Yeah, like you were just supposed to accept what you were told.
Exactly, but then these Enlightenment thinkers came along and they said, wait a minute, Why should we just blindly accept things? Let's question, let's observe, let's use reason to figure things out for ourselves.
So it's like a power shift, right? Taking the power to decide what's true away from institutions and putting it into the hands of individuals.
Right, and I think that's incredibly empowering, don't you?
Yeah.
It means that each of us has the ability to seek out knowledge, evaluate evidence, and arrive at our own conclusions.
Yeah, it's like they handed everyone this toolkit for critical thinking and said, go explore. The world is your laboratory.
That. The world is a laboratory. But, it's not all fun and games.
What do you mean?
Well, if we're not just accepting things at face value anymore, it means we actually have to do the work of thinking critically for ourselves, right?
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's not just about freedom, it's also about responsibility.
Exactly. The responsibility to use our minds, to be skeptical, to demand evidence, to think for ourselves. And that can be challenging, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to just go with the flow sometimes.
Oh, for sure. But I think the Enlightenment reminds us that true progress, both individually and as a society, requires us to engage with the world in this active, inquisitive way.
So it's not about blindly following tradition or accepting
Right.
whatever we're told.
Not at all. It's about questioning, exploring, and constantly refining our understanding of the world around us.
Almost like we're each conducting our own personal enlightenment.
I love that. Our own personal enlightenment. And who knows, maybe by applying those same principles of reason and observation, maybe we'll stumble upon some new truths, some new insights that those Enlightenment thinkers never even dreamed of.
That's a pretty exciting thought. So I guess what we've learned today is that the Enlightenment wasn't just some historical event that happened centuries ago. It's still relevant, it's still shaping the way we think, and it's still offering us this powerful framework for understanding the world around us.
And hopefully inspiring us to keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge and creating a more just and enlightened world for ourselves and for future generations.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the Enlightenment. Thanks for joining us on this intellectual journey.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and never stop exploring.